Thank you, Mark, and thank you all for your patience and comprehension of this virtual. It's the first time that we are doing this COCE conference virtually, and we are trying to do the best so we can keep with the program. And it's an honor and pleasure for me to be here in this panel with you this evening, this afternoon. I'm Ana Claudia, and I work as full-time associate professor at the
Hello, everyone. Greetings. I'm Shubhankar Banerjee, speaking to you from New Mexico, the traditional homelands of the Pueblo, Diné, Apache, and the Ute peoples. Really looking forward to conversation with dear friends on this panel and all of you.
Just go ahead, Erik. You're next in line.
My name is Erik Hoffner. I'm an editor and content strategist at Mongabay, and I'm a photojournalist, photographer, and I've been doing environmental journalism for about 20 years. Also produce our podcast at Mongabay. And I have the pleasure of working with my friend Maria Isabel Torres.
Hello, Erik. Hello, everyone. Sorry for having these tech inconveniences. Well, my name is Isabel Torres. I'm a journalist. I'm based in Lima. I'm the project manager of Mongabay Latam, which is the Mongabay's bureau for Latin America. We cover all Latin American countries except for Brazil. And we have been working and we have been traveling this journey for 5 years, and it has been a really, really interesting experience as a journalist, but also as a manager and trying to expand our impact beyond one country. It's very different trying to do this. So I'm very, very happy to share our experiences and our challenges, and also a lot of questions that we haven't have the possibility to answer yet.
Okay, thank you. And Claire, please introduce yourself.
Well, Claire is having problems with his audio, right?
Yes.
And everyone is introduced themselves? Yes.
Start things.
For this inconvenience connection. But as I was telling you, I'm very happy to be here in this panel. And we are going to discuss first what works or what has been effective in communicating wildlife, biodiversity, and the interrelationship with societies beyond big issues like climate change. I would like to listen to you from your own experience from Mongabay or Shubhankar, from the work that you have been done. Maybe Maria Isabel wants to start, or Erik?
Okay, I can start. That's the part I've wrote some ideas because I don't want to forget anything. But I believe that sometimes when we are when we are on the field, we don't have the time like this for making some reflection on important stuff. And I think one of the most important questions that I always do to myself is if the effort we make on the field by investigating and covering important issues is reaching those we want, or if we should be doing something else or something more, something different. And I want to share some reflection on this based on what we have seen has been effective in our experience, our 5 years experience. First idea is about listening our audience. Since we began to publish, we realized that we have different types of audience. A very specialized one who read the long format stories of 2,000 words, but also we had a very enthusiastic audience, very concerned about environmental conflict, about indigenous leaders, which we also wanted to reach. But we wonder if we were offering that audience the most appropriate way to inform itself. So I think that's the big question. So we began to adapt our content to different formats. First, by summarizing the most important investigation, for example, 5 things to know about the illegal trafficking of jaguars in Bolivia, or then we turn those summaries into videos that we call stories in a minute. And later we also realized that there are concepts that we already take for granted, like primary forest, biodiversity, the wild, bycatch, but they are not easy to understand. So we did explainers about these concepts. And I just found out, making research for this, that kids were doing homework using one of these videos, and they were making jokes in the comment section from YouTube. So that makes me very happy because I'm watching other audiences approaching to this content. And we have also done comics about our investigation and trivia on Instagram. And I believe we are trying to cover more formats to try to get or try to be more inclusive with this audience. I believe it's not only a matter of making more simple things or more simple our stories. I believe it's also a matter of being more inclusive with those audiences. Not everyone had the time to read 2,000 word stories, or to, I don't know, to listen to a podcast from an hour, but perhaps to listen to a podcast from 15 minutes. So, and other thing that was very important for us, for example, was to listen that audiences also want to hear good news. So 2 years ago, we were covering the fire season in Brazil, and it was particularly rough. There was images of burning animals, and we were very concerned to cover these very properly and have all the facts. And we started to read on Twitter and Facebook people asking us, what can we do, or how can we help? So we haven't thought about that. So we started to explore solution journalism, and we have done some special features about effective conservation strategies. And we have also tried to organize that content in maps and, I don't know, databases that allow people to find these initiatives more easily and quickly. And I have two more ideas to explore. The second one is about trying to understand and cover biodiversity issues as a regional problem and not only focus on what happened locally. And cross-border investigation has allowed us to understand the magnitude of problems that we share, and also try to find patterns behind those issues. For example, Mongabay Latam was part of a group of journalists who wanted to establish the magnitude of threatened environmental defenders. We know that there are reports of defenders killed, but we have no idea who lives under threat. So 38 reporters from 10 countries in Latin America have documented nearly 2,400 attacks against environmental and indigenous leaders. So I think it was a big effort and trying to fill a gap where the states and the government has no information. So those investigations allow us to expand our impact by publishing together, because all the news media or journalists the same day using the same hashtag in different countries, because we're aware that we also have to battle for attention on the public agenda. We have the big news, we have politics, economics. So we have launched all these investigations in 5 or 6 countries at once using this same hashtag, trying to get involved decision makers, trying to follow up the stories, trying to see the problem as some regional issue that also deserve regional answers. So, and the last idea, we were also interested in reaching those big news media that are not covering environmental issues due to lack of budget, of interest, I don't know. But we believe that it's also necessary to try to build a more informed and diverse audience. So Mongabay has a Creative Commons license to republish in our content, as long as it is cited, it's free. But for us, it's not enough that we have that license. We have developed a very proactive strategy to reach those news media, and we try to establish a close relationship with the editors, try to know their needs, try to know their audiences, try to offer them contents that could work best on their platform. So we have around 35 or 40 partnerships with important news mass media in Latin America. And that way our stories have made front page in printed newspapers, has been shared by the outlets through their social media. And we have read comments from readers of these news mass media saying, oh, this is content that we have, we want to read. So I just want to start with these three ideas because it's some strategies that has been effective. And I believe there are some other questions about what has not worked. And I believe that the conversation could then go over there.
Thank you very much. I think Claire is ready, and welcome, Claire, to be here. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Can you hear me now? Is my sound okay? Good. My name's Claudia Coleman. I'm a writer from Australia. I'm an Aboriginal Australian woman from the Noongar group from Western Australia, and my prominent art form is writing in fiction, non-fiction, verse, and in theatre. And mostly I use that media to tackle the challenges of colonisation, because the Australian colony is ongoing, and to tackle the long-term effects of the colonial experiment in Australia. Would you like me to go on with with my five minutes or so now? Straight through?
Sorry, that's no, it's just the introduction, but now we would like also to listen to you about what works or what is effective in communicating wildlife, biodiversity, or the interrelationships with societies there from your point of view.
Sure. In Australia has a different situation to much of the world as far as biodiversity or environmental activist speaking communication is concerned, because for the most part Australia has a landscape where our Indigenous people modified the landscape over tens of thousands of years to be a human-centered landscape across the entire country. And since colonization, the environment itself has been destroyed by the removal of Indigenous land management systems. So in reality, in Australia, maybe not more than anywhere else, but in a very distinctive way, the environmental destruction here can be linked very tightly and very strongly to the to colonialism and the colonization of this continent. And so the way I tackle have changed the way that I tackle environmental issues is I tackle colonization first, and from there I lean into the environmental damage caused by colonization, because Australia as a nation still hasn't accepted that certainly in science and in Indigenous literature and Indigenous academia and in science academia, it's accepted that environmental damage was caused by colonization. But to the mainstream public, although the mainstream public in Australia are for the most part aware of global warming and aware of biodiversity loss, because Australia's had among the fastest biodiversity loss in the world. If not, I don't think it's the fastest, but it's one of the fastest. We lose species on a daily basis in this country. So Australians are aware that this is happening, but they don't seem to be as aware that that it's the impact of the imposition of a foreign agricultural system, foreign species, and foreign ways of looking at land that has caused a problem. So what my focus as in this sort of media activism is actually the looking at the damage that colonization has caused, and how colonization is the thing that is most responsible for the destruction. And one of the things that has changed in my work is I produced a video with Jen Ray, who's in the audience, which looks at the kind of the history of colonization, but it also looks at there's been a shift recently in my work to this idea that it's too late to an extent to stop the environmental crisis. It's already happening. Biodiversity loss in Australia is already we're already in the middle of a huge mass extinction in this country. And of course, being one of the hottest, being the driest inhabited continent with a fairly delicate biosphere, we are copying it pretty much the worst from global warming as well. So my work on the environment is no longer about trying to stop the environmental crisis. My work is now about how to survive the environmental crisis.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this powerful thinking. And still in the same issue, what works or what is effective in communicating wildlife, biodiversity, or big issues like climate change? Maybe Erik wants to talk, and then Subhankar.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Anna, and thanks to COCE for having us all and having this interesting group. And look forward to hearing what our audience has to say too. And such a broad topic. How do you communicate these things? Well, at Mongabay, we really try to reach people with useful and accurate, inspiring information about wildlife and nature. We started out really specialized on tropical forests and tropical biodiversity, but now we're known as probably the best environmental news service in the world. We cover pretty much all the topics in most of the regions, but we still are pretty welded to the tropics. And that's because our founder realized that many of the countries with the greatest wealth of biodiversity in these forests also had the biggest conservation challenges. So there were issues there to expose and to write about and report on, but also there were many reasons to be proud of your biological heritage if you lived in these countries. So what he decided to do is transition to being a nonprofit to raise money to open bureaus in each of these places if possible, like Mongabay Latam, for example. And so the whole idea was find your audience. If you have reporting that's relevant to them, find them and make it available to them in their own language. So we starting a bureau in Indonesia, which reports in Bahasa daily, and then we had Latam in Spanish. India came along recently, and that's in reporting in English and in Hindi. And we started a bureau in Brazil to report in Brazilian Portuguese. So now we have the whole continent of South America covered. And then we also translate those stories that we're reporting in 5 languages every day into a total of 10 languages. So we're trying to reach at least the United Nations general distribution of languages, so people can get news and information about nature and wild places and how it affects them. And we have almost 10 million monthly readers, so it's been working. And like Maria had mentioned, part of that is due to our Creative Commons model. We make all of these reports available for free for anybody to use. They can sell ads around it. They can print it in a newspaper in Accra. They can put it on their blog in Colombo. And, you know, it raises the overall awareness of conservation issues, wildlife, and things like this. And so the Creative Commons has really been a really interesting driver of our growth. And then, like Maria was saying, we will also, you know, broadcast the availability of that. Please make this available to your readers too. But we've also branched out into audio and video because some people want to hear their news or they want to see it. And so those have been part of our strategy. I mean, we just try to center people in our reporting on nature. So like, yes, you know, we're driving deforestation and climate change, but we're also part of nature. And many of us are working to conserve it and to restore it and work with it and benefit from it. And, you know, so, and we try to tell their stories. And, you know, it's just one of our proud moments when people that we've profiled or the communities we've written about go on to win the Equator Prize from the UN or the Goldman Prize for their work. And because it's inspiring and it inspires other people, it inspires our readers, and then it just goes on from there. So, you know, communicating the science and appreciation of science is pretty key, but, you know, there are different audiences, right? We realize that there are a whole set of people who really are mostly interested in how this affects me, or really excited about things like how amazing nature is, biophilia. So we stroll into the biophilia realm quite a bit too, and just talk about the whiz bang, really exciting things about biodiversity, or, you know, new species discovered can do this. But there's a lot of dominant narratives we work with and we see out there, and one of them probably is most dominant is that we're losing nature and wildlife. We're losing it. You know, all of the Attenborough specials and the Blue Planet, all these things. You know, it's always debated. You know, how are these things being communicated and all this? But the overall message, generally, in the end of all these, is we're losing. But it's only partly right, and it's a little bit of a hopeless perspective. So we try to take a different tack and you know, do the solutions journalism stories, and, you know, and just general wonder stories, so that people can feel not only do they now know like why your river isn't running as strongly and it's harder to irrigate my crops, it's because, oh, the climate is warming and the glacier's smaller now. But also, I'm really proud to know that we're the only country in the world with this kind of monkey that's, you know, so smart, or something like that, you know. So it gives people a reason to be proud, and that often leads to conservation outcomes too. So that's a really, really interesting thing to lean into. One other narrative we've been tracking lately is this kind of on the opposite end of this. I don't know if anyone has heard about this, but extinction denial is a whole new realm of conspiracy theory, which is kind of fed by stories of, you know, the rediscovery of, you know, the animal that we thought was extinct. But there was a paper in Nature Ecology and Evolution last year that showed that many of the same people that downplay climate change are also downplaying biodiversity loss in the same way. So it's one thing we're tracking, but, you know, restoration is a key thing that we're trying to lean into. It's the UN Decade of Restoration. It's a super positive, you know, we can do this sort of thing, you know, and it's true, we can restore so many things just using the power of nature. So we're writing a lot about that. Also, reforestation is a big thing right now, and unfortunately it can be done ineffectively or fraudulently, but mostly it's done inappropriately. So we publish a database to help people if they want to get involved with supporting or actually planting the trees themselves. They can check out a new database that we did that just basically shows what kinds of projects are proven based on their criteria, like what criteria are they following. Are these projects probably going to be beneficial to the nature, to the climate, and to the communities that are around them? So those are some of the things, you know, I guess just being objective and accurate and original in how we communicate about wild things is super important. We have a 100% rating on NewsGuard, like the New York Times and some others. So by virtue of that, they cite us and report our findings as well. So the things that we are able to surface through our network, and our network is huge. We have 800 different reporters, freelancers all over the world who are reporting these stories for us, and they're seeing stuff that, you know, even the BBC isn't seeing first. So that is really a way for a lot of these local stories that have big implications to get larger. So yeah, but all that said, you know, we really, all of us are science fans, and we're really excited about all the new things that are you know, just increase your sense of wonder about this place that we live, about the creatures that we share with. So that's probably our favorite thing to communicate. I had to say just one.
Thank you very much, Erik. And as Maria says, also one of the key strategies that you follow is listening to the audience and doing a lot of different platforms for different audiences. And now I would like to listen to Subhankar about your experience of what is effective in communicating wildly.
Can you hear me now? Great. Thank you, Anna, and yeah, thank you, Anna, and really very honored and humbled to be in all of your company today. And I can say this without any hesitation. I've said this in public also, that there is no better thing out there than Mongabay when it comes to covering the biodiversity crisis globally, period. So I'm just really grateful, happy, thankful, everything. I picked up a few points, really important points that Maria Isabel brought up. So I'll kind of start with a couple of these things. One was reflection. Like a lot of the times when journalists are working out in the field, reflection is not a possibility. So she reflected today. That was great. She spoke about regional, because I'm going to share with you one concrete example of what we have done recently. So regional, I'll speak to that, which especially when it becoming transnational. Then she also specifically talked about target audience, indigenous communities, which also Anna just brought up. And then Erik specifically talked about people need reason to be proud. So this one concrete example I'll share with you, all of these elements come together. But first, with the idea of reflection, I wrote down a few notes. I'll be very quick. I'd like to begin by reflecting on the conference so far, because it has been really eye-opening and exhilarating for me, this conference. Kurinawan, Jinwa, Septim, Etsuke, Bri, Judy and Tanya, many others shared so many memorable and thought-provoking ideas. Their presentations finally helped me to understand the full scope of the conference title. So the conference title, Re-MEDIAting the Wild, which I thank the organizers, which at first reading would mean remediating the wild or remediating more than human world that has gone through varieties of violence and destruction through colonialism that Claire was talking about a little earlier, also huge amount of capitalism and other systemic violence. But then in the title, media is in all caps. So clearly the organizers are trying to bring clear attention to media. Media is in all cap, bringing attention that media is implicated in all of this, to me, and also needs to be remediated. So a big part of this conference for me has been learning about this sort of media's role in all of this, and how media needs to be remediated, and what even media means. Like a cruise ship is a media. Media is environment. I've been learning all of these things, really expansively thinking about media. So remediation of media itself is very crucial. And that's why roles that organizations like Mongabay are playing are crucial. So now I want to take a moment also to honor and celebrate all the 8 artworks that have been submitted. They have expanded the conversation beyond the scholarly and other informative talks we are having. Further, the role of humor. There's a really, I encourage you all to please look at those artworks. The role of humor and the role of music, the role of sound. Because just like everybody is saying, even as we talk about despair, we need something to also see what celebration do we have. So the artworks with music were the 2 important themes that really resonated with me, humor and music. The documentary musical Mangrove is so beautiful, and I'm of course biased because personally it is very close to me, and Mongabay has done coverage on Sundarban, very wonderful coverage. I'm looking forward to attending the artist panel a bit later today. Okay, now I will return to Anna's question and offer a very concrete example what we have done. Just one example. There are many we can go into, but just one. In 2019, we hosted a rather large-scale project called Species in Peril along the Rio Grande, which included a main exhibition in Albuquerque, New Mexico at 516 Arts, which was co-organized with our art and ecology program in which I teach, and nearly a dozen associated exhibits, murals, public projects, and extensive public programming, not only in the cities, but rural communities, indigenous communities, across the Rio Grande watershed in Chihuahua, Mexico, West Texas, New Mexico, and Southern Colorado. The primary aim, I co-curated the exhibit with Dr. Josie Lopez, who is the curator of art at the Albuquerque Museum. So our primary, and Susan Sparge, who is the executive director of the 516 Arts, our primary aim to go into this was to bring simply public attention to the intensified biodiversity crisis, a simple aim. And just like all we are talking, this is why we are gathered at this conference also in large part. But then the question for us, once we decided, okay, we want to do this, then the next big question was, what scale do we engage the issue? Do we go international and invite hundreds of artists from all over the world? Do we go regional? Do we go very, very local and really look at very serious issues that are taking place in our region? In the end, the answer was not given by a human, but a non-human, our river that we call the Rio Grande in the US side and Rio Bravo in Mexico. The river gave us the answer. So the river became the frame with which we organized this exhibition that then brought people together. Why this scale matters? Why are we even grappling with thinking about scale, geographic scale? Because what happens is that when we take on something like climate crisis or biodiversity crisis, let's say at a very large scale, like a planetary scale, it's great. It's very necessary because we get the big picture. But what we lose is we lose local complexity. But then if we go very local, which is great, we can cover the complexity, but we lose the big picture. So then how do we come up with a sweet spot? And the sweet spot for us, as I said, was the river. And that helped us. So that's one of the things we did. And so what happened is the river became our frame, and it became a regional, Maria Isabel Torres was earlier talking about, but also transnational. Because even though we are regional, but then we are talking about Mexico and US, right? It became a transnational project. And then one more thing, through the engagement, I live in New Mexico, I've lived in New Mexico many, many years, is what Erik was bringing up. People need to be proud. So something that we came to know about, which scientists, of course, knew individually in their respective little disciplines, but what we came to know is that every time you speak about our state, New Mexico falls at the very, very bottom of social metric of US. The worst in child education, one of the worst poorest state in the country, one of the worst in opioid crisis, one of the worst in this, one of the worst in that. The litany of tragedy is just unthinkably heartbreaking. Yet, through this project, we found out that New Mexico has four things: has the third largest mammalian diversity in the United States, has the third largest avian diversity, birds in the United States, has the fourth largest overall biodiversity in the United States, has one of the largest diversity of native bees in the United States. So suddenly a state that only gets talked about in national news as the bottom of the barrel actually has something to celebrate. And then we looked at our, let's say, neighboring states. And as we looked at the neighboring states, as it happens in this case, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California are the four most biodiverse states in the United States. Then we just look at the other side of, in the Mexico, 6 states are among really very highly biodiverse. I don't know exactly the ranking within the Mexico, but highly biodiverse. So the border became the wall that the previous administration and even before that have been building. All of this came together. So just by thinking through specific frames, scale, something to be actually proud of and celebrate, all came together in that one project. We got extensive coverage in regional media, newspapers, radio, TV, but the national media completely ignored us. New York Times, who has done many coverage on my own work, totally ignored, saying it's a regional project, quote unquote. Much more than what we were able to organize in a short span of time. The project planted seeds for much more to come in the following year, which it did happen, and established a strong collaboration among colleagues who otherwise might not be talking to each other. So the project was just a kind of an excuse. We were not trying to create the greatest art exhibit that might be at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Our goal was to bring communities together, to engage in a conversation. And I think we did a decent job because the project proved generative. So that's one example of very recent work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And very interesting view of the importance of regional projects in a lot of communities. So let's talk about the experience that each of you have identified in constructing and deconstructing the current narrative about the wild in the media, and how to move towards other stories and create new media representations. Maybe this time we can start with Claire or Maria. I don't know who feels ready for keep this conversation.
I can start if you like.
Yes, thanks.
I just want to start on this bit by saying that part of the main problem with environmental and biodiversity and with Australia's reaction to these things is Australia has among the least diverse media landscape in the world. Most of our media is mainstream media is owned by one company, which is News Corp, owned by Rupert Murdoch, who everyone in the world knows that Rupert Murdoch is a media mogul who is mostly supports far-right anti-environmental causes, but most people aren't aware that he's actually who was an Australian citizen who gave up his Australian citizenship to buy a company in the USA. So in Australia, the media is almost entirely, the mainstream media is almost entirely climate denial, biodiversity loss denial. They basically are in support of mining and coal mining and all the bad things for the environment at the expense of the environment across the entire, almost the entire mainstream media landscape in Australia. And that's forced people to come up with new ways to be the media. Jello Biafra, the punk singer, said, "Don't hate the media, be the media." And what he meant by that is not just use what platforms you have, start your own radio stations, use social media. He also meant this idea of a conversation can be the media. Evangelizing on a one-to-one level can be in itself be media as well. So I think in Australia, what's been most effective has actually been the use of social media and things like YouTube for the environmental, to fight the environmental crisis in Australia. For example, we have a group called The Juice Media, who I'm a fan of, but I'm involved with, who have started doing videos for the US market now, who do sarcastic parody government adverts where they talk about issues as if it's the government being honest for a change, which is they're quite popular and quite successful. So I think it's the media that we control ourselves are the media that's most effective in fighting this crisis, because as long as the issue is that media tends to be owned by makes a lot of money, so media tends to be owned by big money, and big money tends to support the economy over ecology. So I think the only solution is for media to be small and individual and and rapidly changing and able to be more flexible than the mainstream media, who tend to be wedded to the large cost platforms. So I think that's the solution, to drill hard into using like small and cheaply produced media in order to get a point across.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Claire. And Maria?
Yes. Well, it was very interesting to hear Shubhankar about this remediate the media, because we are trying to reflect on our role, trying to reach more people. But going further, for the first thing I've said, is not only about the strategies to reach people, but also how we are going to reach and with what kind of narrative. And it's very interesting also what Claire said about colonialism and capitalism and economics over environment. And I think it is especially important and key for Latin America and all the indigenous people that live in Latin America, trying to build their own narrative about how they want to be recognized. And I believe in that term, environment has been very controversial with indigenous people, because when we talk about the wild, it seems like we are talking about tropical forests and empty spaces where there is only great jaguars and monkeys, and we tend to forget that that was territory that is it's owned by people, and that they want to live in some kind of way that is not necessarily the way that economics want to do. So when the people want to, I don't know, take oil from Yasuní in Ecuador or from the Amazonia, they really believe that is waste that the territory is lived by indigenous people instead of being an oil concession. So I believe it's more than only conservation. It's about the human rights of indigenous people and how we as the media in Latin America has been able to see that conflict. And I believe that the balance is not very good for my colleagues. And I believe because we have been from a colonialism heritage that I believe is very difficult to go out, even if when you want to. When you want to, because, for example, we want to give indigenous people the voices, and we want to give them a space to talk. And sometimes we also must to remember that we have to ask them how they want to be portrayed in a story. Sometimes we feel that we want to cover what they are suffering and the problems they have, and sometimes they say, but we are fighting this. You can also write about how we are fighting this, and now not only how we are suffering this or about this. So I think it's very complicated and it's very challenging for us as journalists to try to cover these issues. And I believe as trying to join what Sabankar and Erik said, it's a matter of balance, and how difficult it is to get this balance about this local complexity versus this big picture, and how to engage Bolivian audiences about Ecuadorian problems, right? Also balance about how to be optimism and proud about some things, and not so proud that we forget that we are in the middle of a very hard battle. So, and that balance between how to cover indigenous people, how to try to portray their vulnerability, but not trying to make the figure of the victims only, even if they have those vulnerabilities, but how to give their agency to the political acts they are trying to do. So I think this word balance is very important, very difficult. I think we as journalists have failed a lot with that, and it's very difficult, even if you want to try to do a better job. So it's a constant challenge for us. And I believe the first step is, like we said before, listen to them and ask them constantly, how do you want to also try to portray this problem?
Thank you, Marianne. I remember when we were talking about preparing this panel, talking about these problematic words in tribal, tribus, indigenous, natives, and it's very complex. And the wild is not alone by itself, so it's always in constant interaction with people, and we need to listen and to frame all these positions, no? And Erik, you want to add your experience and point of view, please?
Your mic.
Yeah, no, Maria covered all the bases pretty much there for me. We do like something like 1/6 or 1/7 of all of our stories has something to do with indigenous people, because they're such incredible leaders and they know their own land, and they're the best stewards of nature in the whole world. So we just need to keep listening to them and figuring out what they know. It's so deep.
Thank you, Erik. And Subankar, in your experience, you have also worked with local communities and tribes.
Yeah, indigenous communities, many places. But I want to actually pick up on what Claire said. Is conversation is media. I'm paraphrasing you, Claire, but one-to-one is media. So I want to just begin with a presentation that happened at this conference earlier today, and it was by Kurniawan. And I'll not forget that presentation that he prepared for this conference. You can watch it, so I won't go into details. But Kurniawan and his wife read an illustrated children's novel to their 8-year-old daughter during the COVID year, because they couldn't go out. The novel is by an Indonesian author, not an English author or something, Indonesian author, and focuses on wild forest of Indonesia. Till up to halfway through the novel, and they're doing this only one on the weekdays, so it's really spread out over a long period of time. Till up to the halfway through the novel, each time the daughter was asked to describe the forest, she would answer with one word: scary, in Indonesian, scary, which really struck me. I'll leave it at that. The rest of the story, you can look at his presentation, is so incredibly well presented. I'll leave it at that in a short essay. Now I will put on my scholarly hat for a moment. In a short essay, Nobel laureate South African novelist James COCE, that I read many, many years ago. So I have to paraphrase from memory. COCE wrote that in the Judeo-Christian theology, wild is the realm in which God's sway does not extend. So wild is not only scary for human, but even gods have no sway in there in Judeo-Christian theology. So such division between human and wild is a foundation of white Western thought. So in this conference, many of you at various times invoked Aristotle, the great rhetorician, probably a foundation for your field. I really don't know all the sort of the communication theory and its backgrounds and philosophy and so on, but many of you invoke Aristotle. But I'll share with you a statement not by Aristotle, but the peripatetic philosopher Socrates, who was always eager to engage in a conversation. Just like Kurniawan was engaging with a conversation with his daughter, just like Claire is talking about engaging with a conversation and calling it media. So here is what happened. So he was always eager to engage. At one point, Phaedrus, the young Phaedrus, convinced Socrates to go outside of town and sit underneath a tree on the bank of a river to discuss a new book or an article that had just come out. So Socrates told the young man, quote, "You must forgive me, dear friend. You must forgive me, dear friend. I am a lover of learning, and trees and open country won't teach me anything, but men in the town do." Unquote. So philosopher David Abraham recounts this episode between Socrates and Phaedrus in his book, Spell of the Sensuous. So today we take words like nature, wild, and many, many other words for the space that we are working in conservation of nature and biodiversity conservation and so on, for granted. But we forget that these terms were coined very specifically to divide. So we just need to keep in mind, not that we have to give it up tomorrow or invent another term like literally tomorrow, because when I'm with my academic colleagues in environmental humanities, I fight and jostle for both sides. The reason being, when I put on my scholarly hat, I want to get rid of all these colonial terms that our only purpose has been to divide. But then when I put on my activist hat, I'm like, we can't do that. Even my indigenous friends up in the Arctic are using wild and nature and so on. So we have to be a little bit careful. But that said, I think we should acknowledge the history. But if I may, can I just share just one picture, quick picture? Mark, is that even possible? Okay. So
Yeah, just
Yes.
click
Share
the
screen.
Share screen. And then I'll just stop. Just one thing that I think will kind of encapsulate everything that I have learned with my indigenous colleagues. Okay. Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay, great. So 1962, the year 1962 is very famous for the one, oops, sorry. What happened? Can you still see it? Yeah. So
Yes.
year 1962 is when Rachel Carson's book Silent Spring was published, probably the most significant book till to this day on, or one of the most significant on threat to biodiversity from industrialization. But that year something else happened, way up in the Arctic, high up in Canadian Arctic, in a place called Cape Dorset, or Kingite is the Inuit name, is Kinejuak Ashevak, who later became the matriarch of Inuit art and became a national icon, and her husband Johnny Ashevak made a very simple pencil drawing that you can see here, pencil and ink drawing, right? So what you see, what COCE was talking about, that not only the wild is a scary realm for human, but even the gods of human cannot get there. Here you see the human, there the Inuit goddess, in this case Talelayu, or the sea goddess Sedna, the avian creatures, the birds, and the marine creatures, all just not only just near each other, but touching each other in a cosmology that cannot be separated. So I will just leave it at that, and then let's see if I can. So there is a lot I can share with you. One last thing I'll just mention, and then maybe I'll stop, is that so for the last 20 years, I have done what I can to contribute significant part of my life and energy to defend the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge from oil and gas development. And the coastal plain of the Arctic Refuge is what we call biological nursery of global significance that the indigenous Gwich'in people, who are my teachers, Isigwatsan Gwandai Gudlit, which translates to in English, sacred place where life begins. So the campaign to create the refuge was done in 1950s, and the campaign to defend it from oil and gas has been going on since 1980s. So the overall campaign is in its 8th decade. I wrote an academic essay called Long Environmentalism, to understand something that can last this long. And how can it last this long? I get a lot of questions on that. And I say music and food. It's not politics, it's not oil, it's music and food. That said, so if you think about these 8 decades, you would think, what am I remediating here? There is nothing to remediate. It's a defense campaign, right? But as I got into the details of it, I realized there is much remediation needed, because the place was created in 1960 by the US Secretary of Interior, Fred Seaton, through an executive order, which did not even mention the 2 indigenous people who have lived there for thousands of years, more than 10,000 years that their records go back. They were not even mentioned, the Gwich'in and the Inupiat. So this was a form of colonial violence. So remediation is necessary. But of course, then come 1980s, actually going all the way back to 1960s, the indigenous people have mobilized themselves. And they are now at the forefront of this fight. I encourage you to maybe take a look at Finis Dunaway, my very, very dear friend, historian Finis Dunaway's just published book, Defending the Arctic Refuge. The other is media. So the media like New York Times, particularly New York Times, again and again and again, have not only done superficial journalism on the Arctic, but have divided communities between the Inupiaq and Gwich'in because it was an easy reductive thing to do. Because Inupiaq are all in favor of drilling and Gwich'in are all against drilling. This is completely false. Even when I bring it to the attention of the editor, they would ignore it. So remediation of media, suddenly a campaign that looks like a defense campaign becomes remediation because of colonial violence, becomes remediation of media. So so the wild then becomes very complicated. It's not something we can give up tomorrow, but it's something to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Subhanhar. And we are having just 20 minutes around to finish this panel. And I would like to be more inclusive and more participant. So maybe we can listen some questions or commentaries from our audience. And meanwhile, if any of you wants to close with an idea about this panel. Claire, I know that you were having problems with sound, but I don't know if you want to say or share a final idea, or Maria also. Erik, Subhanhar. Well, Subhanhar just talked, but maybe Claire, you want to share something else?
Sure, I'd love to. From all these conversations, from what everyone has said, it occurs to me that at least in countries of, at least in colonized countries that have been colonized by alien thinking people, mostly from Europe, I think we need to consider that what maybe the first environmental act we need to do is to decolonize these countries, to remove the colonial influence that has actually had such a strong effect on the way that environmental management is done. And one way that I decolonize in Australia is I make people reconsider the whole idea of wilderness, because evidence suggests that Australian Indigenous land management practices modified every square inch of this continent for tens of thousands of years. And then when the colonizers came, they came with this idea of a wilderness, which is something that in Australia has never existed. And when the traditional owners have their land management practices stopped by this idea of leaving it as wilderness, the whole environment changes again, which teaches that there is no wilderness here. So I think part of remediation of the wild is changing the way we think about wild spaces on colonized lands, because decolonization may be the first step.
Thank you, Claire. Maria.
Yeah, I would like to join this commentary with the Subhanhar previous one about, again, being critical with our performance on the field, because as journalists, it's sometimes very difficult when you went to a place and try to get the whole picture in 1 or 2 days. And sometimes also we as journalists, we are not enough reflective about this special condition that we have. And I think for me, it was very, very valuable when I started a master's degree in visual anthropology, because it gave me something that I have forgot, because when you are on the field, you are like crazy. That is the value of methodology. And while I was investigating with my anthropology hat and not my journalist hat, so I have to take more time to do my investigation. So I have to talk more not. I also have more time to do that, and I started my investigation about an indigenous people in the Amazonia, who is the Ashaninkas, who is also in Peru and also in Brazil, and trying to ask them about their memories on the internal conflict that we have in Peru, the armed conflict. And first, I need to trust. They trust me. That take time. Second, I need to give the possibility to give a media that they feel with them feel comfortable, because sometimes interview is not a way they feel comfortable. So we start with I don't know, stories in the night, paintings, and that takes time too. So I was figuring, if I do that investigation as journalist and as anthropology, which one will, how different will those investigations be, and how we can try to be more interdisciplinary to do a more complex work in the media. So I think it's something that I don't have the answer. I have the possibility to compare methodologies, and it was very interesting. I believe I was very critique of myself, and I believe it's an opportunity to try to use different methodologies to try to reach that balance and to try to catch this complexity that is so difficult. We can't deny that we have this colonial narrative is in us, is part of our subjectivities. But trying to get out of that in order to write and decolonize is, I believe, the challenge for us as journalists. It's very difficult. It's a challenge that's not, it's in process. So I believe that perhaps is the first challenge for a journalist before trying to reach more. How are we going to reach these audiences?
Thank you, Maria. Erik, please, in 2-3 minutes, final thoughts.
I'm a little bit speechless. I'm really impressed. I didn't know about that, Maria. That's really cool. About your training. Yeah, it's one of the funny things about running a decentralized network of media professionals across the world is we never get to actually hang out and tell our stories. I hope one day that our network will get together and we can have that kind of around the fire thing. But yeah, no, I'm just as someone listening to this, I just feel very like I'm in the right place, and that the conversation that I'm hearing is exactly like what my life's work is about, what my professional goals are for, to just go as far into inquiry as we can and continually be surprised by what we discover about ourselves and about our world. And that's really all I'm about. So I want to just close with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erik. Subhankar, a final thought. Although we have some comments here, if you want to read it in the chat and maybe say some comment that Simon is telling about.
So just on final thought, one last thing. Like Erik, I'm speechless, and here is my final thought. Claire made the call. Decolonize the place, the words, our thinking, and Maria Isabel provided the solution. Let's listen and be sincere. I think that's really my final thought.
Thank you very much. Listening is very important, and inclusion also. And Simon, I don't know if you want to open your microphone and ask the question or make your comment? You are talking about ecotourism and in Tasmania, no? About, please.
Hi, morning, evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hi. Yeah, no, it just occurred to me as Subanka was talking that ecotourism, particularly that's not approved by Indigenous people, sort of takes the form of this sort of colonial destruction. We've got an World Heritage Area that's supposed to be left untouched, and there's been changes made to the World Heritage listing of the place here in order to allow private companies to come in and make money out of it. There's a lot of concern that it's going to change the natural values of the place. So I'm just interested in that idea of ecotourism potentially having, similar implications. Cheers.
Simon, thank you for that remark. It's again a very vast subject. So I'm happy to actually share with you something that you might really connect with and really appreciate. Is musical mangrove is one of the submitted artworks for this conference. If you go to the artworks link, musical mangrove, what the artist scholar Elja Roy, I don't know her personally, is magical. And this subject is covered there for a place that is a World Heritage Site in just a heartbreaking and beautiful way, really beautiful way.
Thank you. There's another question or comment that you want to share with us, any of you. I cannot see the hands up, so just please open your micro.
Can I just comment on the talking about untouched parts to ecotourism and untouched parts of Tasmania? That comes back again to that notion that those parts of Tasmania aren't untouched. They're probably untouched since colonisation, but they would have been modified by the Indigenous people who lived there for tens of thousands of years, and they're not being kept as they're not being kept in the state they were in during when colonisation happened. They have, but the thing is, Simon, I see you say they're untouched by colonialism. They are touched by colonialism because the Indigenous land management practices that existed before colonialism has been ceased. And so cessation of what was there before is a form of modification by colonialism. So they have been modified by colonialism by removing the Aboriginal people. Just like if an ecology is changed by removing a keystone species, Indigenous lands are changed by removing the Indigenous people who manage them. So we can't see any place in Australia that no longer has Indigenous land use as untouched, because it is touched.
Thank you, Claire. Anyone wants to make a comment or question? Please raise hand now. I can see the hand, so I can give you the word. Bri, please. I think we don't listen to you. Your micro is, no.
I asked a question.
Please. Yeah, right. You can write the question. Thank you.
I wrote for Erik. I was just wondering if you could possibly discuss the role of Mongabay kids to the mission of the organization. I just was, looking around at the website and was curious about it and its role as it might fit. And I don't know if that would be the area that you could talk about, but I'm curious about it. This is so much doom and gloom. So I am, of course, always wondering about, the future for kids and, what we can do. with them. And so I'm seeing that page and I'm fascinated by it.
Thank you. Yes. Mongabay Kids has been around for a good long time, but it's just been revived in the last, I want to say 6 months. One of the things that we realized during the lockdowns was that one of the reasons our traffic went off the charts was parents and remote teachers doing lots of lessons, and boy, so many great things were being done with our kids' content. So we immediately went out and raised a bunch of money from donors to hire 2 people. So we have an educator from Melbourne and someone from, I think he's in the UK. Anyway, they're posting great things all the time now. This week we're celebrating Giraffe Week, just to in a kid-friendly way, saying, you know, this is exciting, but oh, did you know, we all need to do something to make sure we can all still see giraffes. So there's a conservation message, but it's mostly about wonder and just getting kids curious about the natural world. We're going to talk about this on our next podcast. In fact, today I was lining up the next show, and we're going to have Richard Louv on to talk about his work with the No Child Left Behind movement, and we're going to have someone from the Mongabay Kids channel on to talk about these exact things. We have to inspire children just to use their innate curiosity to connect with the planet. Don't overwhelm them with the doom and gloom. Get them to fall in love. Just look around and see what's out there that's also exciting as well as scary. And it just goes hand in glove with our mission of raising environmental awareness and creating pride in people that that they have this connection to nature, and the nature around them is pretty amazing and in many cases very unique. So I think that's a message that many kids can get involved with. And one of the things we know is that when children come to their parents and say, hey, I really like this whole idea of taking pictures of animals, and I want and raising my classmates' awareness of conservation, that changes the parents. So
I'll just add one quick comment on this conference. There is a presentation by Judy and Tanya on B&B Hotel. Please take a look at that. They're doing really extraordinary work out there. Yeah.
Thank you. And Jane, thanks for your comment. And she's interested in speculative practice as a form of hope. And also Brie, who cannot open her micro, is asking something to Maria. Please, Maria, if you want to answer, or Subhanka answer Jane's question about practice as a form of hope, or Claire.
Yes, very briefly, I'll say practice for me is a form of hope. The reason I do this is not to fall prey to the despair, because we are all too aware of what is happening. But the reason I practice what I do, and it's never an I, it's always a we for us, it's a large collective, is because there is so much to celebrate still. But we still have to do the decolonization, we have to do all of these. There is a lot to celebrate. And that's why I'm very, very resistant to this narrative of extinction.
I am reading Bree comment about these differences in linguistic or cultural histories, and I believe the first thing that we have talked earlier was about the indigenous people term. for example, in English news media, we read tribal, that is translated to tribu in Spanish. And for indigenous people, that's a word that doesn't reflect their political organization. Tribe seems like something in the past, something that is disorganized, something that doesn't have a political organization. So tribe sound like primitive. So it's a word that here in Latin America we don't use for indigenous people. Even, for example, we use indigenous people, but when I went to a conference of indigenous people, they told me we prefer, we called pueblos originarios. I don't know how will be the translation, original people, from the original. And because they want to, it's a political statement. Naming is a political action, right? And they wanted to be recognized as the first settlers in Latin America. And the name they choose is a way to do that. So it's always challenging. It's always different. I always said the reporter, ask how they want to be named. And I believe it's a challenge for us as reporters, because also indigenous political movement is also changing. There is not only one indigenous group. There are a lot of indigenous groups. And Ashaninkas from Peru are not the same as Ashaninkas in Brazil. And Ashaninkas in Peru are not friends necessarily from Aguajún in the north. So there's a lot of indigenous people. There's a lot of also political interest. They have political agency, right? And so it's a very complex topic, and it requires from us as a journalist to try to understand better, so we can explain better when we write a story. So
Thank you, Maria. And yes, I'm reading the comments about here, and I agree also with Erik that you rely a lot about biophilia in building Mongabay histories, and maybe from children or kids are more biophilic than adults, but we still have this sense of love to everything is alive. Any question? Or I don't know, how are we going with time, Mark? Are we okay? How many minutes do we have left?
Looks like we've overcome feed loop, and we are good to go, so we can end the meeting when we want, but we should end it no later than around 10 to, because it starts on the hour.
Yeah, I know. Thanks, Mark. So any one of the panelists wants to add a final comment or thought, or anyone wants I don't see any raised hand, but if you have a comment or another question, please ask. We have a little bit time.
I think this is just a quick comment about, again, kind of picking up from Maria Isabel's remarks, that indigenous peoples, there is no such thing as homogeneity. It's not that all of them are wanting the same thing. They have their own agency, they have their own aspirations, and all of that. But one of the things within the biodiversity space that is taking place is indigenous language revitalization. So I mean, I briefly touched it on during the keynote, is that the very act of engaging in biodiversity conservation is revitalizing indigenous languages, and in turn it is revitalizing indigenous music, dance. So it's an incredibly vibrant space, small, very small, but very vibrant. And one example is that if you ask the Yupik people of Alaska, I'm learning all this from my dear colleague. She is Brazilian ornithologist, but now in Alaska, Dr. Liliana Neves, is if you ask the Yupik people about shorebirds, they just have one word in English, snipe. But then you start asking them in Yupik, and there is 24 words, right, for different species. And then each of these things is then creating this incredible vibrancy of cultural, so remediation. Again, we are talking about this conference, remediation. It is a form of remediation where the benefit is going in the reverse direction. It's not that the indigenous people are the stewards of the land, indigenous people are the stewards of biodiversity, this and that and other things. But biodiversity conservation is actually, the benefit is going in the reverse direction, where it's revitalizing indigenous cultures, practices, and all of that. It's really, these are the kinds of hopes that, at least for me personally, I find very exciting, yeah, and uplifting.
Thank you, Shubhankar. And Claire or Erik, do you want to add some final or comment about all this?
Anna?
Yes.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Hi, this is Escuela. My video is not working, but I have a question for the panelists. In terms of, I myself rely on, I love Mongabay, by the way. It's one of, I go there for environmental news, but I also, look at New York Times and Guardians or all other commercial media. So in light of what Shubhankar said, that how the shallow coverage by some of those sources, how do we go by increasing our literacy? How do I combat that for myself and for my students? Yeah, I guess that's it.
So thank you, Etsiko, for that remark. If I may jump in, Anna, just to offer a very concrete response. I'll give you a concrete response of New York Times, right? So there is oil development up in the North Slope of Alaska. So yes, Inupiat people have benefited from oil when it is far away, not affecting the whales and things that they rely on for their cultural, spiritual, and nutritional needs. But there is a large contingency of Inupiat who are opposed to oil development in the Arctic refuge. Politicians have avoided it. And so a newspaper like New York Times had the responsibility to, so New York Times reporting on the refuge has been, Inupiats are all in favor of drilling, Gwich'in are all against drilling, because media loves this kind of a division and spectacularity. So it's an example. So, and what that does, it's not just superficiality, but it's very dangerous, very, very dangerous, because it's giving, because the New York Times holds such power over the public perception and the politicians and so on, to sort of throw the entire Inupiat community under the bus with such statements repeatedly, not one time, again and again and again, is a kind of a form of disservice. And the reason New York Times would not engage is simply because it would just complicate their story. So, so how do we go about, to answer your question, So how do we go about combating that? So what I do with my students, I open them up to alternative media. And by that, I think there is a confusion even in this conference. What is alternative media? And I'm not talking about social media. I'm not talking about, the spaces where just bogus information is being propagated. I'm talking about Mongabay. I'm talking about Truth Out. I'm talking about other spaces where very serious journalists, scroll.in in India, print.in in India, very serious spaces. So I try to at least bring them along through simpler stories, short stories, and have them then look at some of these sites, just decide 3 or 4 articles, see what they think, then we would discuss. So it's a slow process. All to say, there is no easy process. So I try to bring them to the point, what is the problem? Not just hyper-sensationalize anything. What's the problem with New York Times or Guardian? But then I bring them along to show how others are reporting the same thing, where this type of reductionism is not taking place. So it's a slow process, Etsuko, but I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
We have also another question from Finn and about Mongabay. Maybe Erik or Maria wants to answer.
Sure, sure. And just dovetailing on Subankar there, diversity of sources. That's the key for us. That and it's the thing that our reporters hate to hear the most when we're editing one of their pieces. Okay, we need you to talk to 2 or 3 more people from all the other sides, because this isn't just that side and this side. And so, you know, that's a journalism example, but even for learning about anything in the world, diversify your sources. And if you can't find things, if the history that's written about that people or that place isn't good, figure out how to reach out to them and connect with them in real time, whether it's for an article or a report or just, you know, anything in the world. Yeah, that's what I would say. A good question from Finn, who says, I had a question about Mongabay. How far can funding of a nonprofit media outlet limit the ability to voice systemic criticism, especially like with commodity, I guess commodity agriculture expansion is what you mean? Sky's the limit. There's no limit for us. We're known for being fearless, especially around things like palm oil, cacao, all these major commodities, rubber. We've had companies delisted from the stock exchange for our reporting, and you know, what we have is donors, big and small, people from my means all the way up to, you know, big foundations that create a pot for us to draw from. And there's an editorial firewall right down the middle. The people who raise the money are on the one side and the editors on the other side. And the development team throws money over the wall and we run with it and write the stories. So I know that that's how a lot of outlets work, but some outlets don't work like that. We don't care if a corporation doesn't like our reporting because we don't sell ads. They can't pull their ads from our pages. There's no way to punish us. And we just ensure that our reporting is solid, it's fact-based, we have sourcing, and we can defeat them in court. And we do all the time. I mean, we always have 3 or 4 different litigation or cases of litigation against us for libel and all these sort of things. And we have beaten all of them for since early 2000s. So that's not to say that we lost in the past. We never lost one of these cases. It's just, it's really hard. And, you know, and some of these companies like United Cacao has shopped its case around from country to country, finding judges that will retry the case against us for libel. They don't win. Anyway, I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Erik. Thank you very much. Anybody wants to ask one more question to our panelists? No, I guess there's no more questions. So maybe we can finish here unless any of the panelists wants to close this conversation.
Not close, but just I think, Anna, it would be nice if you close. But just one last thought, that what we have started discussing here with this is so rich, and I see this as generative. This is every time we do a conference or exhibition or something, I always feel like it's not the end, it's the start of something. That the conversation we have started, I hope, with kind of Mongabay's global reach and integrity in reporting and fierceness in journalism and sincerity, like many things that Maria Isabel brought up and Erik brought up, and the kind of the scholarly depth of something like IECA, that we hope that there could be something. The biodiversity crisis really needs attention. So we hope that there is something could be that we can continue the conversation, and that's all, right? Yeah, that I feel that the sort of this a journalism space like Mongabay with such integrity and something like IECA, where there is such scholarly depth, could come together, and I don't know, something may happen. That's all.
Thank
Would
you,
love to
Subhankar.
hear your closing thoughts, Anna, and thank you so much.
No, thank you. It has been a very interesting panel, full of insights, and you put some challenge over the table of the discussion table. We have to take into account the colonization discourse and the narratives, and also be aware of the effects that our journalists and communication practices can have in local communities. And also we need to be aware of this biophilia or biophilic, and try to invite people to get involved, to get engaged, instead of promoting the loss of hope or not interesting in involving all people about taking care of our planet, and try to remediate and regenerate our relationship with nature. So we also need to think about projects that integrate many voices and many aspects, and try to also, as Maria said, ask and take into account local communities, indigenous people, and ask them how they want to be framed or represent in our work or in our projects or in our products in communication. So it has been very, very nice and insight conversation, and I hope you also enjoy this, even though we have a little problems, technical problems with Claire and myself also. But thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you, Mark, Barb, and all people that are making possible this conference. And I want to invite you to be at 7 in arts-based approaches to environmental activism. It's a thematic panel that we will start in few minutes. So thank you all for you be here with us. And yes, bravo for fixing the feed loop to extended time. Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much, everyone.